The United States of America in the mid-19th century, a nation seemingly at odds with itself, teetering on the brink of an internal collapse. The young republic, born from revolution and ideals of liberty, found itself deeply divided, struggling to reconcile its founding principles with the stark realities of its social and economic structures. The North, with its bustling industries and growing abolitionist movement, stood in stark contrast to the agrarian South. The Industrial Revolution was transforming the North into a hub of innovation and progress, where the call for the end of slavery grew louder each day. The South clung fiercely to the institution of slavery, which it viewed as economically and culturally essential. The vast plantations and the wealth they generated were deeply intertwined with the practice of slavery, making it a cornerstone of Southern life. At the heart of this division lay a fundamental disagreement over the nature of the Union itself. Was the United States a single, unified entity, or a collection of sovereign states with the right to govern themselves as they saw fit? Was it a pact between sovereign states, free to secede at will whenever they felt their rights were being infringed upon? Or was it an indivisible nation, bound together by a shared destiny and a common purpose, where the whole was greater than the sum of its parts? This question, simmering for decades, would ultimately ignite one of the bloodiest conflicts in American history. The Civil War would test the very fabric of the nation, challenging its people to confront their deepest beliefs and values. The issue of slavery, a moral stain on the nation's conscience, further exacerbated these tensions. It was a contentious topic that divided families, communities, and the nation itself. Abolitionists in the North condemned it as a barbaric practice, a violation of the fundamental human rights that the nation was founded upon, while slaveholders in the South defended it as a necessary evil, arguing that their way of life and economic survival depended on it. Compromises were attempted, but the chasm between these two viewpoints proved too vast to bridge. Legislative efforts like the Missouri Compromise and the Compromise of 1850 only served as temporary band-aids on a festering wound. As the nation hurtled towards conflict, the fate of millions hung in the balance. The impending war would not only determine the future of slavery, but also the very nature of the United States itself, shaping its destiny for generations to come. The road to war was paved with a series of compromises and crises, each one pushing the nation closer to the brink. These events were not isolated incidents, but rather interconnected moments that collectively steered the country towards conflict. The Missouri Compromise of 1820, the Compromise of 1850, and the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 all sought to address the issue of slavery in new territories. Each of these legislative efforts aimed to maintain a delicate balance between free and slave states, but they ultimately failed to provide a lasting solution. Each attempt only served to deepen the divide. The compromises were temporary measures that postponed the inevitable clash, as they did not address the underlying moral and economic conflicts. Economic differences also contributed to the growing animosity between North and South. The industrialized North and the agrarian South had fundamentally different economic interests, which were reflected in their political stances. The North, with its burgeoning industrial economy, favored tariffs to protect its industries. These tariffs were seen as essential for the growth and protection of northern manufacturing and commerce. The South, heavily reliant on cotton exports, viewed tariffs as detrimental to its interests. Southern planters depended on free trade to sell their cotton abroad and import goods without additional costs. These economic disparities fueled resentment and mistrust on both sides. The North and South began to see each other not as partners in a unified nation, but as adversaries with conflicting goals. Adding fuel to the fire were a series of inflammatory events. These events were not just political but also cultural, each one adding to the growing sense of division. The publication of Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852 galvanized anti-slavery sentiment in the North. The novel brought the brutal realities of slavery into the homes of many Americans, igniting a moral outcry. The Dred Scott Supreme Court decision in 1857, which denied citizenship to African Americans, further inflamed tensions. This ruling was seen as a victory for pro-slavery forces and a direct attack on the rights of free African Americans. By the late 1850s, the nation was a tinderbox, ripe for ignition. The cumulative effect of these compromises, economic differences, and inflammatory events created an environment where conflict seemed not just possible, but inevitable. The election of 1860 proved to be the spark that ignited the Civil War, a conflict that would forever change the course of American history. Abraham Lincoln, a little-known lawyer from Illinois, emerged as the Republican nominee. His rise to prominence was unexpected, yet his eloquence and firm stance on key issues resonated with many in the North. Lincoln ran on a platform of preventing the expansion of slavery into new territories. This position was seen as a direct challenge to the Southern way of life, which relied heavily on the institution of slavery. While he did not advocate for the immediate abolition of slavery, his stance was unacceptable to many in the South. They saw it as the beginning of the end for their economic and social systems. Southern states viewed Lincoln's election as an existential threat to their way of life. The fear of losing their traditional practices and economic foundation led to widespread panic and anger. They feared that the federal government, under Lincoln's leadership, would move to abolish slavery altogether. This fear was fueled by years of growing tensions and regional differences. Secession, once unthinkable to many, now seemed like the only viable option. The idea of breaking away from the Union gained traction as Southern leaders rallied their states to the cause. On December 20, 1860, South Carolina became the first state to secede from the Union. This bold move set a precedent and encouraged other states to follow suit. 6 other Southern states soon followed: Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. Each state held conventions and voted to leave the Union, driven by the same fears and motivations. These states formed the Confederate States of America, electing Jefferson Davis as their president. Davis, a former U.S. Senator and Secretary of War, was seen as a strong leader who could guide the new nation. The stage was set for a bloody conflict that would test the very fabric of the nation. The Civil War would become a defining moment in American history, shaping the future of the country and its people. The secession of the Southern states did not immediately lead to war. For months, tensions simmered as both sides prepared for the possibility of conflict. The flashpoint came on April 12, 1861, at Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. Fort Sumter, a federal installation, was located within the seceded state of South Carolina. Confederate forces demanded its surrender, but the Union garrison refused. At 4:30 a.m. on April 12th, Confederate artillery opened fire on the fort. After a 34-hour bombardment, the Union forces surrendered. The attack on Fort Sumter marked the beginning of the Civil War. The news of the attack sent shockwaves through the nation. President Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers to suppress the rebellion. 4 more Southern states, Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina, seceded from the Union and joined the Confederacy. The nation was now fully engulfed in a civil war.